Okay. Okay, I click on the go live.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, let's give it a half a minute.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, it's already live on Facebook. Okay, let me just. Okay, just give me a minute. Because the link is very long.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, hello parents. Thanks so much for being here. And this is Coach John here from Learning Out the Box. And thanks so much for coming to our session. Okay, so today, okay, as you know, our brand is Learning Out the Box. So once in a while, besides bringing you strategies that work for math, but we also want to share with you what are the other out of the box strategies so that you can actually help your child to do well, not just in math, but also with for other subjects. So today I have the privilege of having the principal as well as the founder from Kidstartnow. Hello, Dan.
Oh, hi, John.
Hi, Dan. Yeah, so I understand that even though your center provides tuition services for primary school kids,
Sure.
but also you also have AI-driven portal to help children who are struggling with Chinese to do well in Chinese, which I think I need that also because my kids is actually struggling with Chinese. So could you tell us more about your background as well as
Yeah.
probably also I think what parents would be very keen to know is some of the proven tips on how can we help our child to overcome this struggle.
Yes. So let me start with just a little bit of a background information about myself. So hi everyone, I'm Dan. So I'm the founder of Kidstartnow. We are an enrichment center in Bedok, and we also have an AI learning platform that was last year was featured on Channel News Asia. But maybe just take a step back. I am actually somebody who it's a very unlikely person to start a Chinese enrichment center because my Chinese used to be really, really, very, very bad. So I grew up in a Chinese, no, I grew up in an English speaking environment, like many of our kids right now. And so I grew up, really hating the language because I didn't see any point in learning Chinese. Not to mention that, methods of learning Chinese are very dry, a lot of very drill heavy, right? So I grew up hating the language, but then, things got worse because I actually won a scholarship to study in the States. So when I was in the States, obviously for like 3 years, I had zero Chinese exposure. But then for some reason, I had an opportunity to work in Taiwan, and I didn't know why. I just took it. And when I was in Taiwan, I began to realize that a lot of my, ideas and assumptions about Chinese were wrong. And actually that, Chinese is a beautiful language, but maybe the way that I was taught or the way that I approached it was wrong. And that's why, after a few years in Taiwan, I moved back to Singapore because I wanted to see if there's a way I can use technology and, the new learning methods to help the next generation of kids. I think in particular, what I'm seeing is that many kids right now, they don't speak much Chinese at home. And I think it's kind of a pity because um, besides like learn Chinese is for exams and stuff, I think the more important thing is that Chinese is a very beautiful language, and I do wish that more Singaporean kids have the opportunity to realize just how beautiful it is. And over the last 10 years, we have helped thousands of kids, and I firmly believe that every child has the potential to be good at the language, right? But a lot of times we are held back. Now, I think that here's the thing, right? When many parents come to me, they always list about three common problems, right? See, it applies to you, John. The first problem that parents tell me is that my child has trouble reading. Like I go to the library, I ask them to borrow Chinese books because I know reading is important, right? My Chinese teacher always tells me that. But they refuse to. I mean, they come in English books, or even if I force them to read a Chinese book, they just either don't understand it, or after a while they just throw it aside and say that I have no interest in this, right? It's a very common problem. The second common problem is an academic problem. Kids have trouble with comprehension, composition, and oral. It doesn't matter whether your child is like scoring 50 marks right now, or if your child is doing higher Chinese right now, most of the time they will have some sort of issue with compo, comprehend, oral. And the last issue, it comes back down to lack of interest in the language, just like this resistance to anything that is Chinese related. And I think these three problems, like reading, lack of interest, and academic problems, are basically they form about 90% of the issues that parents come to me with, right? And actually, I tell parents that it almost all boils down to a single problem, and that is your kids, they have trouble remembering vocabulary, right? So you think about this circumstance as a parent, right? So you probably have like things here every week or every other week, right? I think it's very common for parents to try to help them, and then maybe your child will get full marks for the spelling tomorrow, but most of their parents say that within 1 week they forget almost everything they learned, even if they got full marks for things here, right? Another problem that parents tell me is that, especially for parents whose kids are maybe in the 60 to 75 mark range, they say that their kids, if your child is in P3, sometimes they forget some words from P1 and P2, and these P1, P2 words sometimes appear in comprehension passages, and because they can't remember what those words are, it affects their understanding, and then they do not do as well as they should be doing. Right, so these are very common issues that parents come to me with. And I always tell parents there's something called the forgetting curve. Have you heard about it, John?
From what I remember, it's like we forget half of the things that we learned in the following day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It actually came from a German psychologist back in the 19th century. It's one of the most important studies for language learning, and it says that just like you said, when you learn anything new, you forget it within a day, and most of it within a week. And one of the best ways to solve this is actually something called spaced repetition. And the idea of spaced repetition is words that you or concepts that you understand, you should test it in less frequency. So you test it further out, and things that you're having trouble understanding, you should be testing it very rapidly. Maybe like if I learn it today, I should test it tomorrow. And if I get it wrong, I should test it immediately after. But if I get it correct, maybe I can test it a week later. And this actually follows a scientific study approach called spacing effect, which says that you remember things a lot better when you learn things in regularly spaced intervals rather than trying to cramp it the night before, which explains the problem with things here, because with things here, all parents are just trying to cram the information the night before, and then maybe you can remember it tomorrow, but basically you don't remember it at all. And I think the lead up to this is something like, I'm not sure whether it applies to you for math, but one thing that we've seen is that the removal of exams is great for kids, right? But it's actually really bad for Chinese. Because what's happening is that for many kids, in the past, like examinations kind of force kids to actually sit down and revise a lot of the words, right? But what we are seeing is that many kids, because there are no exams, they are like, they don't really focus on Chinese at all, and then they just forget a lot of the words, and then they only start to realize that there's an issue in P3, like when they start looking at composition or more complex comprehension, and then they realize that, oh, actually I've forgotten a lot of words already, but because there was no major checkpoints in the past that could have alerted them earlier. So that's an issue that we see a lot in parents right now.
Yeah, so what some of the, since the spacing is a strategy to increase the retention of the Chinese words, so what are some of the things that the parents can do at home to very much help the child to retain as much as they have learned? Right. Forget less stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Spaced repetition, just talk about it, is actually one of the most important methods for learning languages. So I like learning languages. So besides learning, besides taking the HSK6, which is like the most hard examination for Chinese for international learners, I also learn Korean, right? And I've been doing a lot of research as to how adults should learn the language. And almost all adults recommend using something called Anki, which is kind of like a flashcard deck. And flashcard deck, in this flashcard deck of Anki, actually basically does the spaced repetition for you. So you put in all the words that you need in there. Let's say if you're doing for Chinese, you could put all your primary 1, chapter 1 words in there, and it's a free software, except that you need to do it yourself.
How
It will
you spell the
automatically
word? Sorry, how do you spell the word?
Anki.
Anki.
Yes. So
Oh,
Anki is great. I mean, I highly recommend it. I mean, people use Anki for like, I know a lot of medical students use Anki. So like people in university, because they need to memorize a lot of facts, they use Anki, right? Anki, to be honest, is great and has issues for younger kids. You see, Anki is great if you are a motivated learner, which is why it's great for adult learners. Because if you're an adult learner trying to learn, let's say Korean in my case, I'm motivated because I want to, understand Korean dramas, for instance. Right. So I'm self-motivated enough to go through my flashcard deck on a daily basis for just 10 minutes. And the system does the algorithm for me and tests me, right? But the problem is that for Chinese, most Singaporean kids are not motivated to do that. Even if you tell them that, hey, if you just do this Anki deck for 10 minutes every single day, you will improve by 20 marks by the end of the year. Most Singaporean kids will be like, so why? I don't want to do it. Right. So I think that, so for us, when creating our learning app, we actually came from a similar problem, that we realized that kids who are attending our Chinese Enrichment Center, the ones who actually went home and revised were improving much faster than the kids who just came once a week and didn't do anything, right? So that's why we created our learning portal, and we tried to say, how can we combine the spaced repetition that we know works with something that can actually motivate kids to log in daily and just spend 5 minutes doing it? Because we've helped so many kids, and we really see that if a child is willing to log in for 5 minutes a day, or maybe just 5 minutes for 3 times a week, in 1 week, they can revise 100 vocabulary words. And that 100 vocabulary words, if you do it over a year, you're basically revising. You won't have any trouble with your P1 to P6 textbook vocabulary. And that means that at least the first part of your paper 2 until comprehension, you should have no problem at all. Yeah, but maybe I could give a quick demo of what I mean by that. Yeah. So just to share with you, let me share my screen. So this is our online portal, and we provide 7-day free trials to everyone. And the idea that came to us is that, kids love playing games, right? So how could we, try to make it fun like a game, and so for kids to be willing to do it? So what we did is that we created like a pet style Pokemon game, and kids, as they play the game, it will automatically test them, and then they will automatically track what they know and what they don't know, and then they will automatically help them. So I'll give you an example. So in this game, your pet is on the left, and you must defeat the pet on the right. Okay, and the idea is that your attack only hits if you answer the question correctly. So in this, you can't really hear this, that's right, but the word is saying 单独. So this is just a vocab question, and if you get it correct, then you should attack. But I think might be too much people using right now. I'll work on that later. But the idea then is that as kids play with it, and as kids get an answer correct, it will just encourage them to keep practicing. And over the last 9 months, we have nearly 500,000 questions answered on the portal. And we really see that kids, the more they practice, the better they become. And I think that's really the secret sauce in ensuring that kids remember better.
Yeah, I think what I like about what you said and what I resonated with is if only kids like, and I think it's not about, I mean, based on my personal experience, and also because I also teach my kids Chinese, until to a certain extent that sometimes I almost vomited blood.
Oh no, why? Why?
Yeah. I mean, it's not as easy as it seems. Yeah, and I actually like what you have said. That and I realized that it's not that kids don't want to repeat. It's like probably what they're experiencing is boring, or they perceive it to be boring. And they just want to do it. Yeah. And for the fact that you have gamified it, I think it makes it slightly more interesting than just getting them to repeat. Like I would say that typical repetition in at home will be, just read aloud the spelling list.
For sure.
And then we write it like maybe 10 times.
Yeah. Exactly right. And I mean, of course, we know that these methods work, right? And we know that getting kids to revise via flashcards, we've done it for the last 30 years. I think the problem lies that the generation of kids right now, they're very different from, when we were kids. When we were kids, even if we didn't like something, our parents told us that you need to do it, you would just do it, right? But this generation of kids, they're a lot smarter and more independent than us. And I think sometimes they need a more motivational touch to get them to be willing to be doing, right? And actually on that note, maybe I can, share something with you. There's a very important study with regards to reading comprehension. It was basically they took about 600 learners across 8 different countries, and this was second language learners, okay? And they gave them a passage, and they wanted to find what was the minimum number of words that they needed to understand, number percentage of words they need to understand to fully understand a passage. So, for example, that means if let's say a passage has 100 words, what is the minimum number of words that you need to know such that you can fully understand it? And when people first hear this, right, most people's answers are an underestimation. So I can tell you my first guess was 80. I said that I think you need because 80-20 rule, right? So if you understand 80% of the words, you should be able to understand like the majority of what's going on. Well, that's not really 80-20 rule, but you should be able to understand what's going on. But it turns out that my guess was completely off. It turns out that you need to understand between 95 to 98% of all the words to understand the passage completely. If you think about it, a typical comprehension is what, 200 to 300 words. That means that you can only have 10 that passage that you cannot understand. Now I think about, like, for most kids, think about 2 situations. The first situation is a Chinese comprehension passage. Most kids, their reading comprehension is not up to 95%. And therefore, that's why they struggle. And if they can't, so like, when we teach comprehension, we always emphasize that, there are exam techniques that you need to use, keywords, this is how you address, right? But almost all of this is based on the assumption that you actually understand what the passage is. If you don't understand what the passage is, it doesn't matter what techniques you use, you will not be able to really score. And that also goes back to a second problem, which is reading. Why do you think many kids don't like to read Chinese stories? And
probably they find the words like hard to understand also.
Exactly. So now you go back to the idea of 95%. If you buy any book on popular bookstore, do you think a child will be able to understand 95% of the characters in the book? Very, very unlikely, because the books that are written in popular bookstore are not even written for Singaporean audience. They tend to be written for Chinese audience, like in China or Taiwan, and then they bring it to Singapore and they put pinyin there to make it easier. So actually, for your readers, there's a tool that I highly recommend. I mean, I'm sure everyone has heard of Pico, which is the dictionary, right? Another tool I highly recommend is something called like the 中文 pop-up add-on for Google Chrome. It's something that I use when I read Chinese e-novels. And the idea is that you can once it's on, you can hover over any Chinese word and you can instantly see its meaning. And it's very useful because if you know that you need to hit 95% understanding to read the text, but you don't actually not there. So you can use tools like this that show you the meaning of the word. And personally, we've actually integrated it. So I can show you how it looks like actually. So
yeah, I mean, this is a good initiative because a lot of times even when I go through my middle child a short passage, and I think in every sentence she'll be stuck with at least 1 or 2 words, and I am there to help her because she'll look at me whenever she's stuck with a word, and then only to realize that my tone is getting more and more impatient.
That is a problem that I think many parents also face. Like, I mean, we always want to help kids, right? So, but the problem is that sometimes when parents themselves, they are the teachers, it's very easy to get impatient. And then you can start, and then when you get impatient, it's very easy for parents to say that, oh, how come, how come you don't know this? Right.
Yeah.
And then kids, they feed off our frustration. They know
Yeah.
that daddy is feeling that frustrated that I don't get it, but I really don't get it. What do you want me to do, right? Yeah. So let me share my screen again. I can show you what I mean. So for instance, this is a book that I like to read. It's something about reading that. So I like reading e-novels because this is updated daily. So every day I have a new, like a short 5-10 minute novel. And I can tell you that this has helped my Chinese reading so much because this is like what, 1,000, 2,000 characters. But but there'll be words that I might have forgotten, or I know I've read before, but I didn't know what it is. So what I will do then is that, let's say I do not know this word. So I'll just hover over it and it will tell me what's the meaning. So this is like, the Zhongwen pop-up dictionaries, which are really, really useful because previously I will get frustrated. And I can tell you that if I'm trying to read for pleasure, the last thing I want to do is to check a dictionary because it takes too long.
Yeah.
Right.
True.
So with this, I can hold, and also another thing with dictionary is that I find that with dictionaries, you tend to only check words which you are very sure you do not know. Words which you are like 50-50, not 100% sure, you probably just like, okay, I think I know it. But actually, you might not know it. So this ability to just hover over anything is really useful for learning. And we've actually incorporated this into our learning portal as well. So if, for instance, if you click on the top right-hand corner, here we go. What we've done is that we wanted to be able to click on any word and you can see the meaning, you can hear the read aloud, and you can add it to your word list. So adding it to your word list will tell the system that, hey, this is a word that I would like to learn. And then it will just automatically test you as you do the pet battle or any quizzes or anything. And I think as a learner myself, because I'm trying to learn Chinese and Korean, I feel this ability to see any word you do not know, see its meaning, and if I feel it's important, I want to be tested immediately. Is this cycle, this loop, is key to building a vocabulary. And building a vocabulary, as you talked about earlier in this talk, right, is the key to success in the language. And I guess I know for many parents, they I mean, as a somebody, I love heuristics. I love math and science, right? So I think it can be, a lot of times you just want to hear like, is there like a silver bullet I can use, like just like math and science, but I understand this, that I understand it forever kind of thing, right? It doesn't really work for Chinese because a lot of time, the reason that your child is not be able to answer a question, it's not because I don't know the exam technique for it. It normally comes down to there's a word in there that I do not know. I should know it, but I don't know it. I've forgotten it. And the solution is to make sure that you capture the fact that you do not know it and revise it on a regular basis. And it actually is much faster than you think, because when you learn something once, maybe you test it 2 days later, you get it correct, you test it 7 days later. And then from there, you test it maybe 2 weeks later, then 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. So, it actually grows on an exponential rate. So it doesn't take that much time. The problem is that you need to do this for every single word in the primary school syllabus, which will obviously take some time, which is why most language learners, they always go back to some sort of electronic app or stuff like. So adult learners use Anki, which is free, but you need to be very, very self-motivated. So again, for kids, I always find it's probably easier to make it more fun and more gamified so that they're actually willing to use it. Oh, sorry, I can't.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm very interested in the Anki, right? Yes, could you like do a short demo, like how parents like myself can use that on top of this to help build the
Sure.
Chinese fundamentals of our kids.
Sure. Can you see it? Okay, no. Let me change my sharing settings.
Yeah, parents, so if you are still with us or you just joined us, today we have Dan, the founder and the principal of Kidstartnow. And today we are talking more about the AI aspect on how it can help our kids to boost up their Chinese fundamentals. And the reason is because, as you know, lately there has been the chat on ChatGPT, which is an AI platform, and even you can hear it over news, and you can hear that the ministers are talking about it. Yeah, so this is a big thing that is happening in our children's generation. Yeah, so So on top of the typical SLS that our children are using, on top of the textbooks and the other books that they have, I think there are also other ready platforms like the platform that we are talking about right now, which is the Kidstartnow as well as the Anki. Yeah, and if you feel that you need more help, there are actually many ready resources in the market to help you. Okay, back to you then.
Yeah, sure. So Anki, I'll be happy to send you the website later. So again, it's very good for motivated learners. So if your child is comfortable doing their own flashcards, so I can give you an example, right? So the way you use it is that if there's a particular word, so I added this to my flashcard after seeing this in one of the books that I read. And I know that this means to stifle. And yeah, so that means that, oh, I got it correct. I press good. You notice that the options here, if I want to revise it again, it would revise. That means if I don't get it, I find it very hard. It would no, if I got it completely wrong, if I click on this, it will automatically revise very, very quickly, right? But let's say for this, let's say I think it's shelter. Oh, I got it wrong, so I need to test it again. And this one, that if I know what it means, then I'll have to ask myself, did I take a long time to revise it, or am I pretty good at it? Then if let's say I'm pretty good at it, this word will be tested 9 months later. So you can see that even if you have a very big vocabulary, if you do this regularly, it's actually quite easy. So like for this one, this phrase means that somebody cannot actually manage, it doesn't balance things well. I actually saw this in a Chinese article about I think it was Gaokao, about Chinese students doing Gaokao, and I didn't understand what he meant then. But for me now, oh, I get it. So I'll put it under easy, and I'll be able to test this in 7 months. So you can see that if you do this for every single word in your primary school textbook, this means skupu means simple. So you will be able to focus only on the things that you do not know, and things that you know, it will just tested quite far away. So let's say I see another word, right? So so normally what I'll do is this. Say a particular word that might be. Okay, whatever. I'll just put this word. Let's say that I do not know 在意, for instance. What I would do, right, is that I will go to maybe a Chinese dictionary.
Parents, in the meantime, if you have any question for them, please post in the comments box of the Learning Out of the Box fan page. Yeah. So, and then I will when I see a question, then I will post it over to them.
So you can click on this add button, and then from there you just paste it. So you put the word. So the front will be what you see here, right? You'll be seeing like 之后 is like the front, and then the back will be the meaning here. So let's say it'll be to care.
How do you read this? I don't even know how to read this.
Oh yeah. So it's oh, you mean the Hanyu pinyin?
No, just on the what hole.
I think it's 之后, but I'm not 100% sure as well.
Okay.
So like here in this first case, I always try to put an example sentence. I think that's something that's very important for when you're creating flashcards as well, because I think the problem that many kids face is that if they only do flashcards, a lot of times the parents will tell me is that they can recognize the word, but they don't actually know what it means. So with Anki, at least you know what the word means. Then you go to the next problem, which is if you know what it sounds like, you know what it means, do you actually know how to use it in a sentence? Because if you not use it in a sentence, then if it comes out in comprehension, if it comes out in 选择题, or you might be able to use it in a composition, so it really helps you, right? So I just add this, and it will automatically test me in the future. So, oh, I think it might disappeared. So like this one, right? So like I'll just think to myself, oh, I think this is 秩序, but am I correct? I am correct. So I'll say, let's say it's good, right? And so many of these words, all these words that you're seeing, most of them are like words that I might have forgotten or I struggled with, but now I'm putting it into Anki and I use it regularly, that I won't struggle with it anymore. But again, as I mentioned, that this is the gold standard for adult learners. If you ask any adult learner learning a language, a foreign language, they will always tell you about this software. But the problem is, going back, that it's very difficult. The thing about Anki is that for it to be effective, you need to create your own flashcards, and you need to be willing to do it. So you can see there's no graphics, there's no games. The only thing that motivates me to do this on a daily basis is myself telling myself that I want to do this. But if a child is not self-motivated, that's saying that, hey, I want to get better at the language, I want to get good in Chinese, it's going to be difficult to encourage him to do this. In fact, I would say this, right? Anki is not only for languages. It's quite good for parents if you're trying to learn science and your child is motivated to do science stuff. You can use this to do science like facts and theorems and stuff. But for Chinese, I honestly recommend make it more gamified, because I think that's the area that kids tend to struggle with.
Yeah. So hearing that, actually the psychology behind is repetition. Yeah. So whatever things that you want to remember, you can actually put in the form of anything. And flashcards is one of them. And Anki actually provides the digital flashcards platform for you to do the repetition.
Yes, but basically. So Anki is just a software which you can use to put any sort of information you want to remember in it, and it will automatically help track how your progress. So for parents, if you are comfortable creating your own flashcards, your kids are comfortable doing flashcards, you can definitely use Anki because it's free. But of course, if you want a more gamified approach, what we've done is that we've taken the concept of Anki and put it into a game, basically.
Got it. Yeah, I can imagine some of the common response from parents are when you say, okay, whatever you need to help your kid right now, if you're interested, you have to create your own flashcards.
Yes.
Yeah, and I can hear like, where do I get the time to do that?
Well, actually, here's the interesting thing, right? So like, even when I was learning Korean, and I did a lot of research on this, and because there are Anki decks you can just download for free, which has like the most common 1,000 words, stuff like that, right? And the research has shown that creating your own flashcards actually is far more effective than using somebody else's flashcard deck.
Yeah.
The biggest problem is because somebody else's flashcard deck might not suit your needs, because you have to recognize that for most adult learners, especially when they are the basic level trying to learn, everyone has different vocabulary requirements. It's not like Singapore MOE curriculum, whereby if you're in P1, everyone needs to learn the basic P1 words first. In P2, you get a lot of P2 words. So you can use like pre-made decks that your child could use. I would say that the bigger problem for sure for Anki is really motivation. How do you motivate kids to sit down and do something which honestly look quite bland? But yeah, but if your kids are self-motivated, I highly recommend checking it out. It's a very good software.
Got it. Yeah, and I understand that for parents who are keen to also visit and try out your platform, learn.kidstartnow.com, they are given like X number of days free, right, for
Yes.
use.
We have a free 7-day free trial. So you can sign up. You try out both our worksheets, or our pet battle, or stories, and then you can see whether what we've created actually works for your child. And there's a kind of appreciation. We also have a slight discount for anyone who is signs up using the referral code LOB. Yeah, do check it out if you would like. If your child is struggling with vocabulary, or you feel that your child's potential in a language is not unlocked yet, do check it out and see whether we can help.
Yeah, I was letting my kid try, and then I think the facial expression that I got from her, I think is much better than what I saw while I was teaching her Chinese. Yeah, so parents, it's worth a shot. Yeah, because I think like you, I'm also teaching my kid Chinese, and I know it's not easy. So as parents, we are just exploring different ways to see whether what sticks.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also because something that is also not talked about as much is that, especially for Chinese, right? The needs of every single child is so different. So sometimes parents come to me and they ask me like, oh, I know you say vocabulary is a problem. I know vocabulary is a problem, but what do I revise? And I usually will ask them, what is your child struggling with right now? So, and I know we don't have official exams right now, but if you have just a rough like grade gauge from assessments. So if your child is anywhere, I would say below 60 marks or so, I normally recommend first focusing on high frequency words. So high frequency words is especially for Chinese, it's like you take the most common words or phrases that appear in a textbook. So for instance, in a portal, what we've done is that we've actually done it for P1 and P2, because these are the so-called foundational levels. So let's say your child's in P3 and is struggling. I would recommend you, the first thing you need to do, right, is to do all the high frequency words for P1 and P2. By the definition of being high frequency, there are not that many of them, right? Because if you cover maybe the first 100 high frequency words, you already covered a huge amount of ground, right? And here's the good thing. High frequency words are meant to be easy and commonly seen. So if your child is like, oh, this is so easy, mom, like, why are you giving me this? That's a good sign, because they will feel that Chinese is not hard. This is really, really easy, right? And the system will automatically know that this is an easy high frequency word. So if you get it correct, I won't test you for months. But if your child has forgotten a high frequency word, then that's a very important thing to try to remedy, because it will appear multiple times in composition, comprehension, or close passage, right? So again, if your child standard is, let's say, 60 marks and below, focus on high frequency words first. The second thing that I would recommend is, let's say your child is doing okay. Textbook material, not too big a problem, right? And I want to start doing better. And as you know, Chinese is one of the very strange subjects whereby if you master the textbook, it's not enough, right? Because the three key skill areas are compo, comprehend, oral. And all these three areas, a lot of times they use vocabulary that's outside the school syllabus. Everybody knows about idioms, so I won't talk about this, because we all know, you want to have idioms make your composition look better, right? There's this other thing that many parents don't recognize is very important, but many teachers realize that it's super important, and that is 词语搭配. It's a form of 括词. So I give you an example, right? So let's say the word 草, okay, like grass, right? So a lot of times people will learn, like, say, 草原, right, or 草地. But it's quite common for kids to, when they see the word 草 with something else, like say 草丛, they will completely have no idea what it means. And to an adult, you are like, well, but 草 is grass, so obviously it must be related to grass. But for many kids, at least primary school kids that we see, they tend to not know it. And or another example is, let's say you learn the word 照顾, okay? And so 照顾, it means to look after. And so let's say you learn it in conjunction with, like, 照顾父母, to look after your parents. A very easy way to extend the vocabulary would be just to, okay, let's go through other examples of 照顾, like, 照顾朋友, that sort of stuff. And by doing this, one, either you are pulling in words they previously already know. So obviously they already know 朋友, right? But let's say something a little bit more complicated at which they've forgotten. Now when they see the word, oh, 朋友, then they remember, oh, that means friend. And now 照顾朋友 means look after your friends. So you've strengthened, you kind of revise this word. And remember, we talked about the forgetting curve. The problem is that you need to keep revising words. And I think if kids don't read Chinese or don't use Chinese at home, sometimes they just lack this natural exposure. So this 搭配 is a very good way to extend. Besides improving vocabulary, 搭配 also helps you with 主词省句. So 主词省句 is like, you're given a sentence, let's say 我手拉手，弟弟和, and then you need to, you combine it to, like, 我和弟弟手拉手. It's actually a section that is typically only tested in P1 and P2, but we have kids all the way to P4 and P5. They also still struggle with this sort of questions because it involves 语法, and most Singaporean kids don't really know, their Chinese grammar isn't that strong, right? So when you do stuff like 词语搭配, it really helps your child understand, like, grammar structures as well. It will help their composition writing. So of course you're going to ask, like, okay, if you tell me that, like, 搭配 is important, where can I get it, right? Yeah. So obviously I'm going to say that my portal has it, right? But besides my portal, if you look at any sort of 词语手册, right, it usually has 搭配 options. And I can tell you this because, like, most parents will skip that part. So, like, when you look at, like the 词语手册, right, you will look at the word, you look at the meaning, and if you have time, you might look at the 例句. Right, but I can tell you most parents don't even look at the leech. I mean, most kids don't even look at the leech, right? But if you have that time, just go look down, and then you will see the 词语搭配 portion, and just spend a little bit of time on that, because that will really, really help your language. But again, I recommend this if your child is comfortable with the textbook vocabulary already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But again, if let's say your child is still struggling, I wouldn't focus on this immediately. I would focus on high frequency words and making sure your child is comfortable with all the words from previous levels, especially if you're in upper primary, by the way. So upper primary, right, let's say you're in P5, make sure that your child is very comfortable with P3 and P4 words as well.
Okay, so sounds like for upper primary, they have to revisit the P4 syllabus.
P3 and
Yes,
P4, yeah.
P3 and P4 syllabus.
I think it's a bit unfair because, like, you know, with math, right? I feel like because math, every single level builds on itself. So let's say you learn fractions in, let's say, I'm assuming in P1 or P2, and then you learn the advanced fractions, and then you learn even harder fractions, right? So every year you are kind of revising and building upon your foundation.
Mm-hmm.
But in Chinese, it's very common for you to, let's say in P3 or P4, you learn a particular word that is a little bit uncommon, and it might not appear again until like 1 year later. It just pops up in the comprehension passage, and then I've not seen this word for a year. How in the world I expected to remember it, right? And again, the simple solution, and there's a reason why Chinese teachers all say this, is to read more, right? Because when you read more, you are likely to see the word again, because anytime you see this word again, and you can use the 中文 pop up or like the self-help that we in the portal, you hover over it, you see its meaning, and then you're like, oh, now I remember this word again, right? And then it's etched into your memory. But if you don't do any of this, 1 year later you see this word which you learned a year ago and you've never used it again, you're like, what does this word mean? And then goes back to this idea of like you need to have 95% understanding of all the characters. If you don't, you just missed out like 5 characters, suddenly you don't understand what the passage is going on. And then it doesn't matter what kind of exam comprehension techniques that you've learned, you are likely to not get full marks on it or not do as well, especially if you're in upper primary, whereby the comprehension questions are actually really, really tricky.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, so right now, I mean, thanks so much for sharing so many tips for the parents. And I think right now parents have actually a variety of resources and tips, not just not just physical ones, but also online ones.
Sure.
Yeah. So if a parent is really stuck and has this kid who's struggling with Chinese for the longest time and sounded like me, so what would be your best tip for the parents?
Okay. I think it depends on what age your child is.
Okay, primary 5.
Okay, so let's do this in bits. Let me start with preschool, lower primary, and then upper primary. With preschool, right? I would say that if your child, like preschool, we always tell parents that preschoolers don't really hate the language, because there's no reason for them to hate the language yet, because there's no homework, there's no spelling, not much spelling. A lot of times kids are just uncomfortable with it because they don't have enough exposure. There are studies that say that you need to be exposed to a language for about 20 hours a week for second language to be comfortable using it. And I think a lot of times what the problem that we see in Singapore is that at the preschool level, a lot of Singaporean parents are afraid of using Chinese with their kids because they feel that their pronunciation is wrong. And then they are feeling like, oh, if my pronunciation is wrong, I'm afraid that my child will pick up bad habits from speaking to me, and I'd rather not use it. But if you look at a lot of research, it would say that it's better to provide your child with some sort of exposure to the language, even if your pronunciation is not perfect, because the pronunciation can be corrected. But that is far superior to have environment whereby there's no Chinese exposure at all. That, then it's easier for them to fall behind and just lose all interest and meaning in that. Of course, this applies for parents who are actually able to help their kids, right? And another thing I highly recommend is that preschool kids tend to be easier to get them to read because they tend to want to do things with their parents. So if you pull them along and then you say that, oh, I'll read to you in Chinese and stuff, or let's read this together, normally it's still okay. And actually, I once had this conversation with actually a Chinese teacher, and she was saying that she spent a lot of time and effort trying to get her child to be an independent reader at preschool. And her child actually went through a phase of not liking Chinese, even though her mother is a Chinese teacher. But because she was saying that because her foundation was built in preschool, she built up quite a big vocabulary of words. And because she has the vocabulary of words, she can actually read, and that really helped her. And then when she got to upper primary, when she was actually motivated, then it was a lot easier for her. So long story short, in preschool, if you're able to as a parent, don't be so worried about pronunciation issues. Don't be so worried that your Chinese is not so good. Just spend time reading to your child or trying to speaking to your child. Very important thing at preschool level is also don't focus so much on correction, in the sense that sometimes we see parents, they are very like if a child is not saying the thing completely correct, they'll start constantly correcting the child and saying, oh, this is wrong, this is wrong. But actually at the preschool level, kids are very a little bit like they're emotional, but they tend to avoid things that they're trying to avoid things that they're bad at, right? And so if you're constantly correcting them, sometimes they'll just rather just not say anything and they lose confidence. So the technique that we recommend is actually to just always praise the effort first by saying, oh, this is great that you're doing this, and then you subtly tell them the correct way of saying it. Then they don't feel like I'm constantly being corrected, and they feel that, oh, it's great that you're trying, because that's what you really want them. Just focus on trying. Now, lower primary, right, is an interesting level, because lower primary kids is the time whereby they start getting the homework, they start getting the things here, and they start to really dread the language. But they're also not, I would say, at the level whereby they start being motivated. Because like with upper primary kids, we a lot of times by the time hit P5, P6, they are like, oh, I have this goal, I want to get in a particular school, or like I want to get a certain grade, and then they can be motivated. Lower primary is not like that. So I actually recommend that lower primary, you want to really focus on trying to make the language as interesting as possible. It's also an age that you can't really force them to do things that they don't like anymore. So Chinese games would be my go-to option. Things that they can only do in a language to make it meaningful. So the other day I was actually reading this research paper about a English teacher in Brazil, and he was talking about how some of his best students, as in Brazilians trying to learn English, were actually, surprisingly enough, people who like playing games. And he was like, wait, why? It's not like they were playing educational games. And it turned out that in Brazil, a lot of the games were in English. So if you actually wanted to play it, you had to play in English. And so there was a goal for them to do, right? And I think that personally it's also the way that my sister learned Chinese, because she used to play like this game called 三国志 or 三国演义, and it was like a Koi game, and it was only in Fanti Chinese. And so if you want to play, you have to play in Chinese. So that was how she became good in the language. And personally, I like reading manga, even though my Chinese wasn't that great. So there was an incentive for me. So for lower primary, I really recommend that you need to find something that kids like. And don't necessarily think that you cannot find it, because like with our own students, we find that a lot of boys especially, they really like reading Monkey God. So we actually have like a stack of like small Monkey God books. It's part of a rewards in our system as well. Because in our system, as you answer questions, you get diamonds you can use to buy small little stuff. So a lot of kids like to buy this Sun Wukong book. Then they did like to read along. So it's definitely possible. You just need to find ways to make the language engaging. Then we get to upper primary. Now, upper primary, right, is a dividing line. It depends largely on where your child's standard is. If your child's standard is weak, your first priority, right, again, needs to go back to vocabulary. The advice that my Chinese teacher gave me, she's Hong Lao, she's one of our best teachers. And what she used to do, right, is that during the December holidays, before December holidays, she would actually work with the child, and she would just tell them that I need you to spend 1 hour a day for the next 30 days. And all you need to do, right, is that on day 1, I want you to read this chapter 1. Day 2, I want you to go through the flashcards. And she would lay it out for kids. And this is completely optional. It wasn't homework. It's more like, do you want to do it or not, right? And she always focused on the last 2 levels of textbook material words, because she always said, if a child is weak, right, the single biggest thing you can do for them is one, go through a textbook, and two, it's not really a secret, but it really helps, is read aloud. I find that you know a lot, like when you read something in, let's say, Chinese, right, or a language that is a different language, a lot of times you try to do it silent reading, because silent reading is like faster, right? But you will find that if you try speaking every single word, it forces you to ensure that you can actually say every single word, that you can actually recognize every single word. You can't do the 跳过 thing, right? And another thing is that there's studies that show that enunciating the words help you commit the words to memory better. So easy thing you can do, make sure if you are trying to revise old textbook material, take up the textbook, go through the flashcards for every single word, and then read the sentences in the textbook. If you can do that, and also include like the oral passages as well, if you can do that, it will really help your recall. Now, let's say your child is comfortable with the last two level of words, comfortable with the textbook already. What should I do? Then I I would then say that you want to ensure you have two things. One, is your child comfortable with reading speed? Because a lot of times when a child, let's say your child can understand every single word in the comprehension passage, but still does poorly, normally it comes down to two reasons. The first is your child doesn't have a lot of experience with the exam techniques. So like, there's this question word, what do I need to search for? And that comes down to practice. So unfortunately, I would say that a lot of those exam techniques are not well covered in school because it's a very limited time. So most parents either send us look for an enrichment center, or to go through videos. For us, we provide comprehension technique videos. And then it comes, so that is if you don't know a technique. So but what happens if, let's say, I already know a technique, I already know the words, but I still struggle, right? Then it's usually another reason, which is reading speed. Because just because you can read every single character in a passage doesn't mean you can read it fast. And a lot of times what we see is that kids sometimes because when their reading speed is so slow, they tend to only want to read a passage once, or they tend to try to skip passages. But the problem is that as in upper primary, right, the comprehension questions are actually quite tricky. So lower primary, normally you can get away with like, you find this particular phrase, and then you try to match it in the comprehension passage, and you just copy and paste. You normally get the full marks, right? But in starting in primary 4 onwards, so what we see, like for instance, I've seen this passage whereby the question is simple. They're asking you, how many family members do you have? Like, does this person have, right? But then what they will do is that in the second paragraph, they'll talk about, 他的家庭有爸爸妈妈, so on and so forth. But then in the first paragraph, they'll say that, 他偶尔会跟爷爷出去. So it actually requires you to read and understand the passage and say that, it's not only just what is in the second paragraph. In the first paragraph, it's talking about his grandfather. So you can see that if you're somebody who is, let's say, reading speed is slow and you tend to skip passages, you will get the question wrong. That's why it's not the very common advice that most teachers give kids is you need to read a passage twice so that you don't make these sort of mistakes. And how do you improve reading speed? Practice. You just need to read more, do more comprehension passages. Yeah, but I know that's probably like everyone's like, yeah, duh, I knew that, right? But especially with comprehension, it really comes down to knowing the techniques, knowing the words, and once you know these two, you need to do it on a regular basis.
Nice. Thanks so much for helping us to break down from from kindergarten all the way to primary 6.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. So as we come to the last part of the sharing, could you just share with us like one final tip that parents can walk away with?
Sure.
Then we'll wrap up.
Okay. So I think it's more a summary of what we said. I think that I would say this, like every single child has the potential to be great at the language, but they are often held back by the forgetting curve or just the inability to remember.
Yeah.
And I think that if you can just walk away from this session with just one thing, is that the way to solve memory, like vocabulary issues, is you need to know that you need to have some sort of spaced repetition strategy of like every single word I need to have to touch it several times, right? You like a lot of times when parents come to me, they're like, oh, my child has a bad memory because when they see this word, after a while they forget it. And it's like, is there something wrong with my child? I think that the takeaway from this session needs to be that there's nothing wrong with your child. It's just how humans work, right? And of course, some kids are just amazing at their memories, right? But if your child has amazing memory and like that, right, he probably wouldn't be having any sort of issue with any sort of language lah. So, but if you are like you know, for like most people, then it's really about how can I you know, revise this particular word multiple times such that I can actually commit it to memory. And I think as besides a spacing strategy like using Anki or using our app, I think the next part is that really try to focus on reading aloud, because reading aloud is one of the best ways to remember something. So the way you can use this is like, let's say you know, your child learns the word. Don't just learn the word like silently. Try to have this habit of saying out the word. What is the word? Say it out, and then that helps you you know, put it in your memory, because now there's an auditory cue as well. And I know that sounds really simple, but most people don't actually do it, and that really helps with memory.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that probably we overlook. Yeah. And I think it's no one's fault, because this is how we were trained to just read off from a book and then go for exams. And when we become parents, we knew no better, any better, and then we just follow the same thing. Yeah.
I think there's the big difference is also like, you know, when we were kids, it was a lot easier to have Chinese exposure around us. You know, people on the bus, people on the playground, they spoke Chinese. Nowadays, nobody speaks Chinese, so it's just a natural problem.
Yeah. And this one, what I remember, I mean, before we end off in the next 1 to 2 minutes, I think nowadays, children's values and probably compared to our time, at least in my own case, if our Chinese teacher say one, we wouldn't have to say two.
For sure.
Yeah.
Nowadays, kids are a lot smarter than compared to us lah.
Yeah. So if they say read this, okay, then 说华语 how then I think probably at that point in time, there were more Mandarin speaking environments.
For sure.
But nowadays, most of us prefer to speak English, and I think that's also one of the potential issue.
For sure.
Okay, then thanks so much. Thanks for being here. And parents, if you are keen to try out the 7 days trial with Kidstartnow learning portal, actually I did try, and as I was sharing just now, in case you miss it, the facial expression that I got from my girl is definitely much more motivating than what I saw when I was teaching her Chinese. So give it a shot if you are someone like me who also teaches your child Chinese at home. Okay, then thanks so much for
no problem.
See you around. Take care.
Thank you. See you.
And bye, parents. Good night.